afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our panel this afternoon. We're going to be talking about research-enhanced teaching with a whole panel of experts here. And it is my pleasure to actually invite you all to this afternoon's discussion, both from internationally, from the UK, from our sister university at DUT, and from here at UKZN as well. This is going to be forming part of a UTLO series on research-enhanced learning. And this first part of it, we're going to look at more the kind of global viewpoints of what teaching, research-enhanced teaching is all about. So I'd like to turn first to Professor Helen Walkington from the UK. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself? And then also just a little bit about global perspectives about the research-enhanced teaching sort of nexus and how we can make it work for our practice.
Okay. Thank you for inviting me here. So I'm Professor Helen Walkington. I'm at Oxford Brookes University in the UK, which is an institution that is a former polytechnic. So we have many technical disciplines as well as an interest in research. And we're trying to integrate research into our teaching in a whole variety of ways and across a variety of disciplines. My background is that I'm an academic geographer. And so I still teach geography, but my professorship is, I'm a professor in higher education, so I'm very interested in higher education pedagogy, the sort of science and art of teaching, and very interested in research-based learning for students. And so my most recent work has been on developing cross-institutional approaches to embedding research into the teaching and into the student experience. And I've run national journals for students to publish their research in, it's specifically in geography. And I've run national conferences for students to share their research with a broader audience. I've also run an institutional project called Get Published! For students to share their research work with the public. So we open the doors of Oxford Brookes University to members of the public to come in and to share in what the students have found out across a variety of disciplines. We have 4 faculties, and undergraduate students and taught master's students share their work through posters. So it's a very informal event, but raises a lot of interest in Oxford because members of the public can come into the university and see the latest findings across a broad range of areas. So that's my background. So to turn to your first question, just remind me.
So before we go on there, I just want to clarify, when you talk about students, you're talking about undergraduate students, right?
Yes, I think it's very normal for postgraduate students to engage in research. Even if they're doing taught courses. But for undergraduate students, it's perhaps less common and perhaps less anticipated for them to come into the university and suddenly be expected to engage in research. So my work has been to try and broaden the opportunities for students to do that right from day one when they come to the university, to start identifying as a researcher, to value research in their disciplines as the basis of the knowledge that they're learning. But by the end of their courses, to become creators of knowledge. And that's something that in geography we do through fieldwork and through experiencing other places, collecting data and generating new knowledge. But my work is now looking across the breadth of disciplines and thinking about how we do that in every subject. Even the hard to reach ones like law and art and mathematics and things like that.
And what's the global perspective right now about this kind of teaching?
I think that undergraduate research is becoming an international movement, really. And I think there's a proliferation of things like journals and conference opportunities for students to engage in. And this is kind of driving academics to think about how they can support students within the curriculum to achieve the creation of knowledge and research outcomes so that students can participate in all those opportunities. So I think there are kind of a variety of different ways that students can experience research in the curriculum. It might be just as simple as an academic bringing some research data into a class and them dealing with that and analysing it. It might be that they're learning about the research methods that are normal for their discipline. It might be that they're engaging with thorny issues within the discipline and having to be very critically engaged with the research literature. And I guess I see as the ultimate form of this when students actually pose an inquiry themselves, and it's a research-based education, so they're going out, framing an inquiry, collecting data, and actually producing a result that they then share with either their cohort of students or a wider group of people, and for the very best work, make that fully public. And I think in universities, we're definitely doing some of those things that I've mentioned, but we're not necessarily stepping back and planning at the university level or at the programme level all of these things in a well scaffolded and supported way, because we tend to, I guess as academics and even as students, we think about the immediate module we're teaching or for the students, the immediate piece of work that they've got to do. And it requires us to step back and design the curriculum with a very holistic perspective so that we support students throughout that journey. And I think that will then have implications for thinking about, well, what do students need to do to prepare for this before they come into the university? And what do they need to do that will allow them to continue this researcher ethos once they move into their jobs or further study or professional lives?
Thank you for that. I know we're going to have follow-up questions, but I'd like to turn to Professor Sibusiso Moyo from the Durban University of Technology and ask you about, a little bit more about, is the current undergraduate curriculum addressing these kind of attributes, or what are we missing,
Okay, so yeah, like you say, thank you so much for the invitation. My name is Sibusiso Moyo. So I'm a DVC for Research, Innovation and Engagement. I'm a mathematician by background, so I started off working with engineering students and students from, the management sciences and other faculties, and for a number of years. And then I moved into research management, and now I'm responsible for the portfolio that not only takes care of the research side, but the innovation side as well. So, and then one of the things I'm responsible for currently is the trying to make sure that our students' attributes, skills from the formal curricula are also transferable to other industries. So we place students in industry, we make sure that they're able to get the relevant experience that they need. So the question you ask about whether we are getting these graduate attributes as we need them, especially when it comes to research and innovation, because I believe that when we look at what the role of universities is, in fact, the traditional role, most people would say you go to university, you get a degree. But the question is, if you look at many universities, they will have very nice statements about, strategic statements about, we are either a research-led institution or teaching-led institution, and we're good at teaching. We want our students to be excellent and employable. But the question we are asking ourselves now is are we really training our graduates for employability, or do we want them to be also job creators? And how adaptable are they to change? You'll notice that in the current climate, there are lots of organizations which are retrenching people, in fact. And there are many graduates actually who get degrees, but then they're not able to get into the formal sector, find jobs. So the issue around attributes to me also shows that we need to do more than what we are doing in terms of having graduates who are able to be sensitive about their environment, to look at opportunities that may arise in their communities, in their environment, to be able to adapt to change, but also career-wise, to be able to be innovative in terms of, if the job that I was trained for is no longer there, what else can I do? And that's the question. So for me, what I find is that at a strategic level, one needs to think about, yes, we have the formal curricula where we say students must do A, B, C, D. But what is happening on the other part of that is the informal, what I want to call informal curricula, or in some cases you may call it, at our university, we call it general education, but in some universities, there are many terms that are using non-credit bearing, modules which students must do. So for me, this extracurricular is very important, whichever way we define it. And we just have to make sure that opportunities that we, when we design our curricula, that there's space and time for students to be able to innovate. And when it comes to that, that means that in our curriculum, we need to have time for both the teachers who are involved, whether it's academics who are teaching, the lecturers, to have space where they can think and create. What I found typically working with engineering students is that their classes would start very early in the morning and they just go for lectures the whole day. So you ask yourself, when do they get space to actually go out of their formal classroom and think about other types of problems, design other things? So one of the areas that we are pushing currently is around project-based learning, which we are trying to, we've started on a small scale, working with our some of our lecturers to make sure that in the existing curricula, they create spaces for innovation and creativity in order to encourage students. And if you look at many of the projects that come out from some of these modules, in fact, whether it's in the health sciences, in the engineering, or even management sciences, students are sometimes given projects to do as part of their assignments. Some of those projects actually are quite creative when you look at the outputs, but those end up on the shelf. So of course, from my side, my concern is that what are we doing with that type of work? Are students doing this accidentally? They come across these results accidentally. Are we actually helping them to learn the skills that they need early in terms of research, in terms of research ethics, in terms of the process itself? There's no need for us to wait until they come to a master's or doctoral level to introduce research, which all universities are doing now. All universities have got programs for developing researchers, publication writing, how to write your proposal. In fact, working with graduate students who are doing doctoral candidates. Why don't we do that at an earlier stage? There's no reason why. So I feel that we are now, and given these issues around unemployment, a very low percentage of our graduates get into the formal sector, job layoffs, which also mean that you need to transfer skills and so forth, the fourth industrial revolution with all the technologies that are coming up, that we have an opportunity to really look at what we do, to create spaces for creativity. I suspect that, in fact, if you look at our students now, they have a lot of energy. And one of the reasons I believe that you could attribute some of the striking, the time spent on just doing other things, could be that maybe we don't have enough of the extracurricular within our higher education institutions that could help our students to focus on other types of skills that are needed.
So it's also maybe the pedagogy we're adopting needs to also transform and not remain the same as it was for generations past for all of these as well. And that brings me nicely then to you, Rubby. So you from the UTLO office at UKZN, but you also a ministerial appointment, the Department of Higher Education, and your task team is looking at the national framework for teachers, I think. So it's called... sorry, I'm just going to have a look at it. The National Framework for Enhancing Academics as University Teachers.
That's correct, yes.
So is it addressing some of these things for like academics themselves and how they can approach this issue?
Certainly, certainly. In fact, that's the raison d'etre behind the entire project. And thank you, Sibu, for that wonderful analysis. And the important focus on graduate attributes. And the starting point for my current work, so as Fatima indicated, I'm director in the UKZN Teaching and Learning Office. And I suppose I'm on this panel wearing three different hats.
Yes, true.
As director, responsible for promoting, sustaining the scholarship of teaching and learning. And I'm also an advisor on the Teaching Advancement at Universities Fellowship Program, which two of you are fellows of. And the third is my current role as member of the Ministerial Committee on Enhancing Academics as Teachers. And the point about graduate attributes, I think is crucial, except that quite often our starting point is not quite appropriate. And my starting point has been to step back and ask, if we are to activate particular kinds of attributes in students, what kinds of attributes will it take in academics, as teachers, as university teachers?
Sure. Yeah.
And so using those two other hats, and of course acknowledging the fact that, you know, university classrooms are very lonely spaces. We are very competitive, we are highly individualistic. The publish-perish mentality is what drives us.
Yes.
And so I've come to realize in all my years as teacher, educator, researcher, and now as director, that you can achieve very little without communities of practice and networks, which is what this is about. Yeah. And I want to share with you a little project that my current group of TAO fellows have engaged in, and the starting point being exactly that in order to activate graduate attributes, we first need to define what academics need to possess as valuable attributes.
This collaborative visual project, conceptualized by academics from 7 South African universities, takes the form of a multi-layered electronic poster, which uses the botanic metaphor of a baobab tree. The poster is used to explore, identify, and illustrate what the authors consider to be valuable attributes of university teachers. The project responds to the Department of Higher Education's National Framework for Enhancing Academics as University Teachers, which identifies 6 leverage points, or imperatives for action, one of which is the imperative to develop expectations of academics in their role as university teachers. The emerging expectations and attributes draw on the author's lived teaching experiences, captured in their individual Teaching Advancement at University (TAO) fellowship projects, drawing on the conceptual framework posited by Henry Giroux of teachers as transformative intellectuals. The attributes proposed by the TAO group include the university teacher as a champion of diversity, an ethical practitioner, an engaged professional, a lifelong learner, a transformative intellectual, an innovator who fosters local relevance and global consciousness while demonstrating a commitment to sustainability. The baobab tree epitomizes the desirable attributes, as its rhizome-like roots are buried deep in the African soil, nurturing valued academic attributes. These anchor and feed the valued graduate attributes represented by the leaves and the fruit of the tree. The root structure of the baobab represents the rhizomatic patterns of engagement between academics, students, and the environment. There is no beginning and no end to this complex and intricate ecosystem, relentlessly generative of new knowledge, while the shoots and roots are spontaneous, organic, and unpredictable, as is the nature of knowledge generation. The authors contend that while the baobab metaphor signifies endless possibility and potential, the development of requisite academic attributes are mediated by external influences, the climate, the social, political, economic, physical, and legal challenges and obstacles over which academics often have no real control. Currently, the untransformed higher education climate is not conducive to optimal growth and is regarded by some as toxic, presenting a challenge for academics and students and policymakers, a challenge which the TAO Fellows embrace.
So, as you can see, we waited for the last frame to show off the work of this unit, which developed this video.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the rationale for that particular project was to mitigate the tendency for the bottom-down approach, where we develop attributes in some smoky dark corner with men in white coats, and then expect that to be imbibed and internalized by academics down the in pecking order. And so we said, let's try the opposite approach. And so that's the outcome. And the important thing about it is this is an evidence-based approach. These attributes emerge from the individual projects organically, rather than, of course, there's nothing new. You know, these are all familiar in the discourse. But it's something that the academics have taken ownership of because it's emerged from their praxis. So that comes back to the point you asked me to reflect on, and that is the Ministerial Committee on Enhancing Academics as Teachers. And I had the privilege of being part of the first committee which actually designed and developed the national framework. That's this document. And you would have seen in that presentation, there are 6 imperatives in this framework which are intended to activate the scholarship of teaching and learning and to give substance to professional development of academics as university teachers. And here the assumption is that university teachers are not trained to be teachers.
Yes.
They're trained to be scholars. So it's an unreasonable expectation for them to excel as teachers in the classroom there. And therefore, the university system has an obligation to provide appropriate mechanisms to enhance the quality of teachers by creating structures, which is one of the petals here, to ensure that university teachers are recognized and rewarded for excellence, for taking on the challenge of being excellent. And then there's a crucial dimension that is often ignored, and that is leadership development. We assume that our leaders are sufficiently qualified to undertake the task, and our experience is quite different. Then it's about the dissemination of knowledge and how to professionalize that to prevent the kinds of abuse that is currently going on in the system. And for me, the most important, and the petal that I've committed myself to, is developing expectations of university teachers. If we don't know what those are, then it's going to be virtually impossible to engage in all of the systemic and structural domains.
So when you talk structure as well, I mean, I understand that a lot of the universities are now going into kind of programs for academics to get more information about how to teach, the pedagogies, the underpinning, different ways to assess and so forth. But I guess for me, the other issue is about, are we placing enough emphasis then on creating the pipeline and the innovative space in the undergraduate? Are we doing that? Because when you talk about awards for excellence and that, they do exist on a national level, but I'm not too sure whether it's all about undergraduate or it's some about innovation in kind of teaching models for any level. So I think coming back to what Prof. Sibusiso Moyo had said about creating the space in the undergraduate environment for innovation, for critical appraisal, for thinking that you had said, for kind of showcasing the work so that we get this deep level thinkers moving into our postgraduate studies as well.
Yeah, look, I mean, we are in a crisis in higher education. As Sibu rightfully indicated, we're not being responsive to the broader moves and shifts in the marketplace, in the job environment. And that's what students are responding to. So we tend to pathologize their behavior without examining what the underlying causes are for their discomfort and their anger at our unresponsiveness.
Right.
And so you're probably aware that last year, the year before, we initiated a project at UKZN trying to establish from industry what they value in our students. So graduate attributes through the eyes of the employer. And then we went down to academics and asked them what they think industry values as as graduate attributes. And unfortunately, that project died because one of the leaders didn't see the value in it and he cut the funding. So I'm in the process of reactivating it.
Yeah.
So you have a triad of understanding. The student's understanding of what he thinks or she thinks is valued, the employment sector, and academics who are doing the valuing
Yeah.
and the training.
I think that's an important project, and through you, Chair, that maybe it would be important to revive such a project, because I think it's relevant to all of us, and we are also battling with the same issue. I mean, we get different feedback from industry, different feedback from the academics, but the other issue I wanted to raise was that even in our institutional environments, I mean, the one thing I've observed, I mean, talking to academics, especially on this project-based learning, is the size of the classes. Many of them raise the fact that, yeah, sure, I've got all these ideas which I'd like to embark on, but how can one do this with the large numbers? You know, I've seen a lot of massification, a lot of growth in terms of numbers in higher education. So how does one continue giving a quality, you know, delivery of the program, and in terms of ensuring that students can interact? Because I think that when we talk about our style of teaching, and even our tradition in terms of delivering the curriculum, it's not just going to the classroom and, you know, giving your lecture and then you leave, which is typical for most university situations. Is you want to have that interactive type of setup. But how does one do that when the numbers are so large? I think that's the one area which we are really battling with.
Yeah, well, I have a view on that.
Yeah.
And it stems from my earlier remark about classrooms being lonely places, both for academics and students.
Correct.
You know, we need to really challenge this competitive streak in our students and get them to see the value of working together.
Well, on that point as well, I mean, most US universities, and I'm not sure about the UK, so Helen, maybe you can tell us, are moving towards this kind of team-based approach. So they're finding problem-based learning too resource-intensive, but the team-based approach is giving them the best of both, because students work on projects together and they get to know each other, and then the teams change after 6 months. So you then rotate and get to know other people in your class and things like that as well. But like I said, that's also a pedagogy question that we need to talk about. My follow-up to you, though, Rubby, is where I was getting to was the fact that you know, academics come and go in universities all the time. So you have people starting at different points in time. And I'm wondering whether we also have a missed opportunity where there is no initiation or orientation of that academic into what the entire program looks like, the learning outcomes of that, and how what they will be teaching feeds into that. Because I think a lot of new academics that join the university don't get to that level. And I'm wondering whether your project ever found anything around that.
Well, the project is based on general research of the environment, which finds that universities typically have an HR approach to initiation, to orientation.
Yes.
You need to know that policy.
Yes.
And that's the consequence of not abiding by the policy. And we lack a developmental approach.
Yes.
We lack a supportive approach. We lack an approach which affirms where academics are and then take them to where they should be.
Yes.
And so the consequence of that is there's a lot of mediocrity in the system.
Yeah.
There's a dumbing down of teaching because research is still valued as a standard bearer.
I know,
And
Helen.
what we are saying in the teaching, the scholarship of teaching and learning is the research is of paramount importance. But research of your disciplinary interest in itself is quite shallow if you don't combine it with research of your teaching.
But
So-
also inform your teaching with that research as well, because then you are further building the evidence base in that regard as well.
Absolutely.
Correct.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Can I just add?
Well,
here?
I was going to come to you now, if that's okay. So we're moving to a fellow colleague, also from the Durban University of Technology, Dr. Anisa Vahed as well. And as an academic, Anisa, I know you've got other comments, but can you also please tell us about a little bit about your background and how you face this challenges and enablers in implementing this aspect into your teaching?
Thank you, Professor Sulieman, for this opportunity. I think it's fantastic. This conversation is quite exciting for me. So I come from a dental technology background, which is a very laboratory-based practice. And so research is not considered as a norm to my profession. And that's where the challenge is, because I work with an industry that says we don't need research, we want skilled people. And so I think in addition to the other challenges, we need to have a change of mindset, because research is about your discipline. But just before I want to continue, I want to tap into Professor Moyo's idea of creating spaces, and that's critical for me. I think university, one of the greatest challenges that I'm confronted with, my colleagues are confronted at the forefront of teaching, especially at first year, is a lack of infrastructure. And if we do have infrastructure, it is desks. So you can't encourage an environment where you want to have these team-based approaches, innovative technology introduced in the class. We don't even have the basic IT equipment into those classes. So I think the resources is a huge challenge in our respective universities. And so students automatically, I mean, when they walk in, they have to go find a chair, and that's critical. Because then you have to become creative teachers. And we can become creative. It's a matter of going down to botanical gardens and having a classroom at the gardens and being innovative in that way. So in order to create those spaces, you've got to ensure that university classrooms are conducive to teaching. And so that's one of the challenges. So what I just like about, so that was one thing that I like to tell you, is that the spacing is about actually going into the classroom, observing this, having analysis of this, what it is to be into a classroom in a UOT currently, what are the challenges that we are experiencing. But Rubby, I thoroughly enjoyed the video, and there are three things that stood out for me. And the one was being an ethical practitioner, the other was being an engaged professional, and a disciplined master in your discipline. And that's what Professor Walkington's work is all about. It's about how do we bring this research and your teaching close together. Those are the tenets of all of the ethical practicing, becoming a researcher in your discipline to build the research. I mean, Professor Walkington and I have been working in the last 2 weeks, and it has been an absolute pleasure being part of her workshops, because she says, embrace this word research. We often shy away from it. Why do we shy away from it? Use it, take control, take ownership. So I think those are the challenges, is that there's this publish or perish notion has stopped academics from embracing this concept of research. I think has stopped academics from actually thinking somewhat outside the boxes of, hey, I can actually co-teach and invite Rubby to my classroom and give a different perspective of what it is about researching in dental technology. He may not be a dental technologist, but he has valuable expertise where he can bring it to my classroom and break those barriers that we seem to be working. The biggest challenge, another big challenge, is we seem to be doing wonderful work. I'm an internal optimist that my colleagues are doing fantastic work, but we're working in silos. And that's very sad. So they're doing beautiful, lovely work, but we're working in silos within the department, across the department, and across faculties. And so the challenge is, how do we rise above that? And that's why we're here today, to start this conversation. And we need to start thinking, and Rubby, that is just the beginning of what we call a compendium of case studies and how to move towards it. And your position in the Department of Higher Education, together with the TAO Fellows, I mean, we have been TAO Fellows. And so this work on undergraduate research and teaching has actually kind of started when I was a TAO Fellow, because I'm in the classroom, I'm in practice, and I see a lot of good work happening in the university. And I think the lecturers are one of the most positive things about the DUT lecturers and other lecturers in our university, is despite the limited learning spaces in terms of resources, we're resilient. We are really resilient, and we become so resilient that it's become part of the norm. So when you get a new academic coming in, you're quite right, Professor Sulieman. Who is teaching that academic? In my earlier days, I remember my ex-boss sat in my classroom for 8 months, watched me lecture. You talk about scholarship of teaching. is that happening now? He sat and he watched me lecture. He understood dental technology. I understood dental technology, but I didn't really necessarily understand the teaching behind dental technology, which is a completely different practice. And so those are some of the challenges that we are confronted with. But I think there is so much hope in this, because this very conversation which we're trying to build on is feeding to the larger national agendas, is let's not start at a postgraduate level. Let's start at an undergraduate.
But you have tried in your classes
So-
as well. So tell us a little bit about that.
So yeah, so some of my the lessons that I have to share with you is that you start first year. Do not wait for, one of the biggest issues is the curriculum often pitches research at the higher levels of undergraduate. And I think that needs to change dramatically. It needs to change in terms of policy and structures. And you need to kind of do what we've been trying to do in the last 2 weeks, is try to convey this message that why start at fourth year? Start at first year. I also think this whole concept of scaffolding, scaffolding research. And scaffolding research is about the components of research. You're scaffolding your reading, you're scaffolding the research literacy, you're scaffolding techniques of understanding. So I value my academic developed practitioners, I value my writing counselors, I value any support team of the university, because they come into my classroom and I share that space with them. So we do create spaces for innovation and thinking, not necessarily innovating, but thinking about becoming an innovator. So you have a different perspective rather than just working in my field of dental technology, but how do we bring that spice into the classroom? And how do we encourage that different thinking? So I infuse components in my undergraduate that enables me to make my practice more, Helen, authentic, And so those are some of the things that you infuse supporting structures of the university into your classroom. And then you kind of then scaffold that through and create a pathway, which is what we were trying to say. There needs to be a pathway created from first year to senior level undergrad into postgraduate for research.
Because I guess if you don't embed love for research from the beginning, you can't expect them to get to final year, find it suddenly a pressure scenario, fall in love with research and want to continue with that thereafter. But Helen had an important point in some of the workshops you were talking about, is that we tend to label things differently when we don't make it evident to the student that this is actually research. So essay writing, critical thinking on a particular thought, solving a problem, it's research. And we should be telling students, like you said, about those kind of opportunities that are getting. But also I'd like you to speak a little bit more about the kind of approaches you're using to ensure that the students get that affirmation from academics, from the public, from writing, in terms of your journals and that sort as well.
Okay, so yes, I think the terminology we use is crucial. And I think if students come into the university perceiving research to be a scary thing, or if staff talk about research as if it was in danger of being, taken over, research time being taken over by teaching commitments, rather than thinking of it as central to the project of what a university is about, that it's a nexus between research and teaching. That is our core business. And for students, they need to appreciate that the smaller tasks that they do, especially early in the programme, are research-like activities. And so they together build into research. So students can be quite transformed by the thought that they've become a researcher. And we shouldn't wait till the final year and students are about to leave for that to happen. So when they're doing a literature review, even if they're just researching for an essay in the very first week at university, we need to be clear that this is a research activity. This is part of what we do as academic researchers. This is part of understanding your discipline, is reading in your discipline. So some really basic aspects of research literacy are reading and writing. So reading a research paper for a first year student can be quite daunting. The language is very difficult,
Yes.
but simply breaking it down and asking them to read some journal articles and talk about them. So the learning space is a dialogic learning space in the classroom. Chairs or not, in the botanic gardens or not, it doesn't matter. It's about the quality of dialogue. But students need to have read the article before they come to the classroom. So that dialogic space is really important. Once we can scaffold that process of reading and students can break down an article and they're not afraid to engage with the literature anymore, they can start to become writers and think about how what they read has been constructed by other people, and they can break down the process of writing. And I think that from my time here in Durban over the last week and a half, this is a very consistent message that writing is a challenging practice. It probably won't come as a surprise to you, but it's exactly the same in the UK. We don't have as many second language students, but we do have struggles with people writing at an academic level, and we do need to support that work. So whether there are writing centres and we bring them into the university, or whether students are encouraged to use that, we still need to do things in the classroom. So within lectures where students can actively be writing, maybe in teams, critiquing each other's work. And it's for this reason that I established a journal, because I wanted students to be able to write for a real audience. And I was shocked and deeply saddened when I realised that my students don't really care about what I think about their work, but if it's going for an external audience, they deeply care, and they will take much longer. They will perfect it. They will get their family to help them check it. There's this extra layer. Yeah. And so by creating, it's almost reverse engineering, creating opportunities for students to share their work, like journals, conferences, really authentic situations, even if it's product design where students are pitching to people outside the university.
Yes, the industry.
These authentic, real world situations where students are communicating their research are important for raising expectations. And then the role of staff is to support students with that, to prepare them for these high stakes situations and to break these processes down in the curriculum. But I think it's important that we don't just treat lectures as opportunities to convey material. They are precious opportunities where staff and students are in one place for a dialogue, and we therefore need to use preparation time for lectures as times when there's just some digestion of content, so that students can come and have really good quality conversations about what they've been reading. They can take opportunities to comment on each other's writing and enhance their research literacy in very interactive ways. And I think it becomes then, lectures become unmissable. You can't afford to miss those precious opportunities to come together and have a dialogue, because it's those things that are preparing you for real world situations. So, yeah.
I think
I
Rubby.
want to pick up on this one.
Sorry,
what
Rubby
Rubby
had.
said about creating communities of practice, and what you said, which to me I think is very important. So the communities of practice, even among students, is quite interesting, because it also provides not only this knowledge sharing and support system for them, but it gives them a lot of confidence. Because I remember about a year ago, we started off a project in the you've heard about the fact that a lot of our students don't usually have money for meals, the ones who depend on the government loans, because it takes long for them to get the NSFAS loans. So I remember once we were invited to go to this residence, one of the residences, where it was all female students. And when they told you each of their stories about their experience coming to university first time and the experience, it was quite interesting to see how resilient they are. So what we did was then we said to them that, okay, you know, after the event, we did launch a project, you know, Feed the Hungry Student, but we also decided to start a series of sessions, and the outcome of that was going to be a book where each one of them tells the story, but they write it, you know, eventually they were going to get some coaching, of course, to write it up in a form that would go into a book. And this changed completely, you know, instead of like they were feeling bad about their situation, but they always used to come on a Friday afternoon in the research seminar room, and they would work with somebody to, first of all, the first session was to tell their stories and then to see how to write up their work. Yeah. They wrote it up. We say to them initially, write it whichever way you want. And most of them are quite hesitant about, oh, my English, my grammar. But the whole process, it took a year, but we now have a product which is going to be published in due course. But now they actually put a lot of pressure on you because they want to see the book, you know. Yeah. Like, when is the book coming out? So we are just trying to get someone to do a forward for it, because I think it was a very interesting project. But that community, after some time, becomes a very good network, because in those groups you find some of the girls have had terrible experiences, you know, which range from everything, rape, a lot of the experiences which are quite traumatic. So it's a closed place which is protected, but we also take them through the processes about ethics and all of that. You know, disclosure, yes, you can disclose so much, but also you can't sort of start mentioning names of people, if, you know, by name, because you're just writing the book. But I think the communities of practice that you mention is very important at every level.
But also, I mean, if we're talking about the fact that we're talking about research enhanced teaching, this is a reflective piece that these students are also doing, and they're learning more about how to write up their experiences and how to express that as well. Rubby had a follow-up for Helen as well.
It's a point just to extend Helen's and Sibu's argument about those dialogic spaces and how to demystify it.
Yes.
Oh, yes.
You know, there's a kind of alienating aura about research.
Yes.
And how do you break that down? And fortunately, I had a life before being an academic as a school teacher. And I taught in a technical school. And we inherited students who were the weakest of the weak, who couldn't make it in the academic stream and were channeled into a technical school. And many of them were English second language learners who had minimal proficiency in English, but they were required to pass the same examination, the grade 12 exit examinations. And how do you teach writing skills at the grade 12 level, exit level?
Sure.
And so I was forced to develop survival strategies for myself and for students. And so they wouldn't write because they couldn't and they didn't want to. And because they were terrified of the red pen which would underline and cause, you know, further alienation. So I tried to tap into what do students enjoy doing. And invariably, because they were all boys, they liked cars, they liked buses, they liked sound systems, hi-fis and car stereos and so on. And so I used that as a starting point. And I would ask the question, which is the best car in 2019? And a group of students would have to get together and decide on which the best car was, and they would have to present to the rest of the class, and the rest of the class would say, it's rubbish, it's nonsense. On what basis are you making that conclusion? Where's your evidence? Of course, without that vocabulary,
Yes.
but that's what they were essentially saying.
Yes.
Provide the evidence. And that group would go back and come up with magazines, with statistics and data about why the Volvo was the best car for the year. And then they would write up the experience. So we moved from the alienating experience to a familiar experience. And so, yeah. And I think it's important to start off in undergrad with enjoyable research experiences which affirm where they are at.
So I'm going to ask the three of you, based on your experiences, you as a school teacher, you doing this work in the UK, you trying to implement it. Because the common refrain from academics is that we just do not have the time. It's going to be too resource intensive, you know, all of those sorts of things. So exactly how much time does it take and how intensive is it? And, you know, because you're going to have academics resisting this form because they want to do their own research and they don't want to encompass it in all of this. So exactly how resource intensive or how time intensive are these things to do?
Well, I'd just like to, before answering your question, I'd like to just extend on Rubby's
It seems to be-
dialogical space and
yeah.
how you start and demystify those spaces. And I think it's brilliant that you open up with just an abstract, something that students like and they enjoy. And if you take it up in the lower undergraduate, in the higher undergraduate, it was interesting to hear in the last week and a half how academics actually are engaged in those dialogical spaces outside the academic calendar. And they come to Saturday classes and they get a community of postgraduate together with undergraduate, and they engage in dialogical spaces. I have to say that my experience of working with the engineers on a Saturday was fantastic, because they invited the supply companies, and you're working on an equipment. We take it for granted that students know how to work in equipment, but just giving a demonstration on a SEM machine and opening up a space and what's the value of this machine, how does it actually impact on the research, leads to various conversations and building up that dialogical space to continue even during the academic week. Getting back to the point about how do we, is it a lot of work in terms of doing this? Yes, it is a lot of work. And I have to say, and I stand, and I'm going to put myself out there, you have to also draw yourself to those like-minded people who share the same interests as you do. I'm sorry, I have to state that very frankly. It's very difficult to work with somebody who says, yes, I'm interested, but actually is not interested. And so I tend to be drawn to those or attract those who are keen on learning or want to do what I'm doing and sharing those spaces. I have to say, I'm fortunate to have Professor Moyo here, because that very idea of bringing this teaching research closer together, I have presented to other academics, but she saw the value in what I was saying. And so here we are today having this discussion. Otherwise, we wouldn't quite be here if somebody in the senior management level does not support it. So that's another challenge. So you can have these wonderful ideas, but if you don't take it up the ladder to your middle management, to your senior management, you're basically yet again working in those silos. So yes, it's a lot of work, but the reward at the end of it is just amazing. So my reward is working with you.
And Helen, what about you?
Well, I was going to argue the opposite, just to be provocative, that it actually isn't extra work. I think that if you integrate research into your teaching, you can be freed up from some of the content that you need to convey. It's not that you're going to have to put on additional courses. You just teach the courses that you teach in a different way. So it's the pedagogy that changes rather than the workload. So I think it's important. I think the curriculum design, the scaffolding of the whole process through the years does take time. And I agree that it takes a group of people who are together committed to doing this at a programme level, because it would be easy to just change your own teaching and not have the impact that you could have if the entire programme changed. But if we put our students first and think about their entitlement to education, it's important that it's not just the students who happen to choose a module by a particular lecturer that get a research experience. We want all our students to experience research. And so it's important that we try and adopt this programme level approach, and if we can, a whole university approach with a strong strategy that supports research engaged learning or research enhanced learning. But I think in terms of enacting this in individual modules, it doesn't take much extra time. We still provide the same number of modules to our students, but they have an explicit and clear research element to them. Now that might be a research strand, so in the modules that I teach, we make it very clear to students that this is a very strongly research-based module. You will do a research project as part of this module, you'll learn research methods, and you will also learn how to analyse the data that you collect. Once students have done that, and for us that's a very core compulsory part of what we do, we use field-based learning in geography, and so students will do a field trip. You did talk about resources as well as just time. So obviously that takes resources.
Yeah.
And in the UK our students pay for their education, so part of that payment for tuition fees is used for supporting them on the field trip, so they don't pay anything additional for that. But in the third year, students have the option to write up that group-based research project as an individual paper. So they'll take a personal angle on the research data, they'll take a slice of the results and write that up individually. So it doesn't cost us anything additional to do that, but we do adopt a more supervisory or mentorship pedagogy in supporting students with their writing. We don't just say, go away and write it up. We use a lot of formative feedback so that we'll take in draft work and make comments on it. And because I've been running the journal called Geoverse, it allows students to see published work, and they can see previous field trip projects occurring in the journal. Obviously there are other universities contributing to the journal, but they're in evidence that previous students from my university have had their work published, and so they can see models of high quality writing that they can aim for. And something that I would love to encourage the Durban universities to take on is a journal of some kind for each institution, because I think it acts as a scaffold for students' writing, and it's possible to have a kind of, I would call it a warts and all journal. In other words, it doesn't matter if there's a few mistakes in there, because that itself can be a learning
experience for students as
yes,
well.
absolutely. Yes. So you can get students to download articles and to critique them, and they can form the basis of discussion about how this research could be enhanced or how the writing could be improved. So it's possible to have a learning journal as well as a kind of top showcase of the very best work, which can be more publicly orientated. So playing with the audiences, I think, is a powerful way to do that. Thinking about who is a suitable audience for this type of work. It might just be other students within the university, and when is it appropriate to put this out as a marker of this is excellent research from our students for the public.
I'll give you the last word before I wrap up, Rubby.
Sure. and that's a useful end to a different kind of start in how we conceptualize teaching. I think as university teachers, we're obsessive about the syllabus rather than focus on the curriculum as a holistic learning experience. And if we abandon the syllabus and experiment with alternatives such as problem-based learning, project-based learning, and I think we are not taking advantage of the 21st century's learners' innate abilities to navigate technology and to use technologies smartly. We still conceive of writing as writing a script. We still conceive of numeracy and literacy in very traditional ways. And that's not the way our students are actually imbibing knowledge.
Yes.
We're not making optimal use of social media, of their familiarity. For instance, creating a chat, a moderated chat using, I don't use WhatsApp, but I'm sure it has a facility.
Or even Twitter.
Or Twitter, where you moderate a chat, where each student in a particular formation contributes meaningfully to that chat. I think we are at the beginning of new possibilities if we abandon those age-old methodologies we are so accustomed to.
So I guess the discussion for me has been about the fact that we do use research but not explicitly in our teaching, and maybe it should be more scaffolding across the curriculum. And that in a way what we could start off with is a group of like-minded individuals across the years trying to do something like this and have proof of concept to get adoption across the program, across the universities, across the disciplines, but not abandon it because we want full acceptance right at the beginning. And I think that with the extended curriculum that you were talking, or expanded curriculum, we're talking about the fact that universities are not Mondays to Fridays, 8 to 4, 8 to 5, but they are online, they after hours, they weekend time, and all of that sort of thing. And so that needs to evolve. And I like the fact that we do have people who think, young learners who think differently, who use different tools, and that we should be incorporating that to help them advance their teaching and learning in that regard. And to remember that the Bill Gates of our worlds and the Facebook creators and the Twitter creators were actually at college level, undergraduate level, developing all of these, and they've now become innovators and job creators. And that we need to understand that sometimes we need to be able to expand the abilities of our students to think outside the box, and therefore become the kind of leaders of the future that we want them to be, and job creators of the futures that we want them to be, and innovators. And hopefully at one stage we in South Africa will get our own Nobel Prize winner in these kind of categories as well. So thank you all for joining us. I will tell you that the next one will talk to students about their experiences in incorporating research-enhanced teaching into their activities and their engagements as well. So until then, thank you very much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Fatima.
Thank you.